internet, the psychoanalytic talk, and today I wanted to talk about a concept which I find very interesting to understand a lot of clinical phenomena, and it was postulated by Guntrip. So the concept is named in and out relationships. So what you have to understand is that at the core, Guntrip theorized it for the schizoid personality, and I do agree that it's very present within people with schizoid personalities, but I think that it can be generalized to more issues or more mental health problems, and not just the schizoid processes. And I'll explain why in this video. So let's go back to the fundamentals. What is in and out relationships? Well, very simply, it's when a patient, in this case, invests a therapist, an institution, other people, and he's going to at some point withdraw, break off from the person, and not breaking off in that understood way, but breaking off, always leaving in a way the door open. And for Guntrip, it was something that was very important in the therapies of schizoid personalities, because basically schizoid people who have a schizoid personality might find it hard to connect or even dangerous to connect to others, including a therapist. And as such, what's going to happen is that they're gonna break off the relationship at some point because it's becoming too intense. The person might understand too much of their personality, too much of their core being, and that's a threat, because for the schizoid individual, that means being incredibly vulnerable, something that they fear beyond everything else, something that's so massively incredible for them to just, when I mean incredible, it cannot be believed, incroyable in French, who cannot be believed, that they can do that, and it can be frightening. It's like coming out of a bunker in the midst of war. It's something that's very dangerous, at least how they perceive it, and that's the whole point of the in and out relationship for the schizoid individual, is to break off. I'm like, no, I'm not going out of my emotional bunker. I'm safe. I don't want to risk myself in a relationship. And for the Guntrip, that's the whole premise of the schizoid treatment, is that you have to accept that they're gonna have in and out relationships, and therapy isn't gonna be stable. It's not gonna be one continuous action. Is going to be repeated throughout the years, and that's something that's, I think, incredibly true and so well pointed out and explained by Guntrip, that it's the whole of the relationship is not compromised. On the contrary, it's necessary, because there's those moments of regression where the person does not necessarily want to put themselves in danger by building a relationship. This, of course, harkens back for Guntrip to childhood, that the parents or the caregivers or the environment was so unable to take care of the individual. The individual had to retreat within oneself and grow abilities of autonomy, and that autonomy is there to prevent dependency on others. And so that's the core fundamentals of Guntrip's idea of in and out relationships. But what I found very interesting working as a psychologist is that it's not just schizoid individuals that might have those defenses, because basically it can also happen in a whole range of disorders. But the ones I'm thinking about are, of course, things like depression, in which the person might start growing an attachment, but also start becoming more and more afraid of that attachment, afraid of leaving a state that is terrible, of course, but is also something that's known. In a way, it's like the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. And it can happen sometimes that there is a break-off of like an in and out relationship, but people still come back months, years later to try again. And I've come to understand there's not a failure, nor on the therapist's side, nor on the patient's side. It isn't. It's something that's necessary sometimes, because the relationship needs to survive despite the absence of both parties. In a way, it's as if the relationship did not die, but was put in the parentheses for however long the patient is not in the process. or even sometimes the therapist is not in the process. And what I have found very interesting is that the relationship is never lost in internet relationships. It's not a destruction of the relationship. It's even saving of the relationship. Saving it because it would become too intense, too powerful, too massive for the patient. So therefore, the patient saves himself, the therapist, and the relationship by leaving. But that leaving is, what I've come to see, is only temporary. They will come back at some point. Maybe not necessarily with the one therapist, but they will go with someone else. And to what extent it counts as in and out relationships, I don't know. I maybe broaden it too much, but I think that as long as there was a good enough relationship at that point, that good enough relationship is internalized, and even though the patient may leave and you might never gain contact again with them, they still keep what has been done in therapy, and perhaps it's a good basis for another clinician or practitioner to go for. And in a way, this is, I think, the real true hopefulness of internet relationships, because often as therapists we can feel that we've failed at something, or that institutions have failed to maintain a patient within therapy or within the institutional setting. But I don't think it is, because it's needed, as I stated. And it also, when they come back, strange enough, it strengthens the relationship. Like in a couple of cases I have been lucky enough to witness, sometimes people show themselves more open, more able to talk about what they feel, as if this was in a way a testing the relationship itself. And I was talking about other disorders. It's also, I think, very true in borderline personality disorder, that people are going to cut off and then come back as if nothing ever happened, or as if time hadn't passed. It's very interesting. I find it always so clinically enriching, those processes. They're not easy to tolerate on the side of the clinician, as you question yourself a lot of, what have I done wrong? What I could have done best or better? But in a way, it's necessary, and I've come to understand that, thanks to Guntrip, that it's a necessary process of certain forms of therapy. Of course, not everyone goes through internet relationships. I'm even going to tell you, not all schizoids do it, so it's not like a one-size-fits-all, right? But that can happen. And the fact that can happen, and that we have this framework of internet relationships, is so hopeful, because it allows us to maintain hope and maintain the idea of the relationship, and the relationship was in our minds, and most likely in the minds of our patients on their side, because they will continue to think about every process that we've gone through, and that when we reunite, things just spark themselves back again, and the progress can then be good in a way, in a strange way perhaps, and in my very own vision of things. It seems that internet relationships are like an investment. It's an unknowable investment, because you never know if the person is going to come back, but when they do, things go back again, and sometimes they even grow better than what they used to. And I'm saying that as if there was necessarily one episode. It's not necessarily the case. It can happen 2, 3, 4, 5 times, right? But the importance is that you have it in mind. It's not failing, it's necessary, and in that necessity, it can be worked on. It can be verbalized both by the patient and by the therapist as what has happened during that time, what has happened to the therapeutic relationship. And that understanding can make us go forward and perhaps even grow a better relationship, as the patient realizes the therapist will still be there and there's no repercussions for leaving or for deserting or for running away. That on the contrary, it's more about acceptance, and that once the patient is ready, he comes back or she comes back. And that's something that I found very important, and something that I've seen a lot of clinical usage of, meaning that once I've discovered that theory of Guntrip, it enlightened so many clinical cases in which you don't necessarily have a clear understanding, but sometimes the relationship is just too intense for some people, that going deep and connecting with another human is complicated, sometimes fearful, and sometimes a person might even feel suspicious of the clinician, thinking, well, is he doing that so that he can get more money, and so on and so forth. So in and out relationships also regulate a certain emotional level, and they're incredibly important. And I think that it's important as well as we talk about it, that we spread awareness about it, because unfortunately it's not a very well known concept. Perhaps because Guntrip himself is not necessarily that well known, but that idea, like so many others, is so essential, and I think it should be like part of the basis of how we teach therapy. That these things can happen, and when they happen, they're not meaningless. I think that's very important. When a patient leaves, it's not meaningless, and if he leaves, comes back, leaves, comes back, there's a real importance for the therapist and for the patient to think about, and that's essential. And of course, if you're more interested, Guntrip goes into much more detail in his wonderful book, The Schizoid Phenomena, Object Relations and the Self, which is, to the extent of my knowledge, like a collection of many of his papers, and he talks very well about them, and about schizoids, of course, but of a whole range of issues, and in and out relationships. And in and out relationships, at least in my opinion, don't only regard schizoids, even though they might be more prone to it. I think a whole range of other conditions, which I've not listed exhaustively, of course, but you get the idea. So I hope you found the video interesting, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.